Hi, my name is Michael Sahno. I'm Jewish and I love Israel. So if you love Israel, if you love being Jewish, or if you have an unwavering connection to the land of Israel, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the 12 Cities in Israel podcast. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Hey, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? My name is Michael Sahno, and welcome to the 12 Cities in Israel podcast, the only positive podcast about the state of Israel. Its people, its culture, its food, everything. If this is your first time watching, please hit the like button and the notification bell so you always get the brand new episodes when they come out. And if you want to take us with you, you can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and on Spotify. Just to let you guys know, before I get started with the episode, we're doing a Kickstarter right now for the 12 Cities in Israel Modern Hebrew Aleph Bet flashcards. It's actually a Kickstarter for the whole Modern Hebrew set. We're gonna see how much we get, and then we're gonna fund from there. If we get enough to do the first set, the Aleph Bet, we'll do just that one, and then we'll use the returns we get on that to make the following sets. The next one that's gonna be made, I'm gonna start on it. I've actually already started on it, but it's going to be numbers in Hebrew. Also, I've released the Aleph Bet flashcard set as a Kindle book, so you can find that on Amazon. You'll find the link for the Kickstarter. You'll find the link for the Amazon Kindle book, both of them below in the description, so check it out. All right, here we go. Let us move on to the subject of this podcast, which is part 2 on the Palmach. The Palmach are the mobile Jewish strike force, which eventually the mobile Jewish strike force of the Haganah, the pre-state defensive force of the Yeshuv. Now, the Yeshuv, I didn't really explain what that was in the last episode. So the Yeshuv is the sort of governmental organization that dealt with Jewish affairs in Mandatory Palestine. So I have to state this again. At the time of the British Mandate, Palestinian denoted anyone who lived within the borders of Mandatory Palestine. That would have covered Jews, Arabs, Christians, everyone who lived there. If it was your place of residence, then you were a Palestinian. Now, I took the information, I got into it a little bit in the beginning about whether, because one of the descriptions was that the Palmach was this super duper fighting force. They were effective. They were absolutely effective. But whether or not they were like SEAL Team 6 or something like that. Now, they weren't like that. They were more like, honestly, they were more like the Marine Corps, the United States Marine Corps, in the sense that they took ground and they held it. And they, what's the mantra of the United States Marine infantrymen is to find, close with, and destroy the enemy. And that's what the Palmach did. They found the enemy, they closed with them, meaning they got up within fighting distance, and then they destroyed them. We're going to go over from 1946 onwards. I have here in my notes, I told you what it means. Palmach means Plugot Machatz, which is strike force or strike companies. Strike companies was what I found on the Palmach Museum website. That was their definition, their English definition for what Palmach stood for, strike companies. And I'm also going to give you their definition. They were the enlisted brigade of the Haganah, constituting the military defense force of the Jewish Yeshuv, which I told you about, and Zionist movement until the establishment of the State of Israel. They were the army of the Jewish state in the making. So the Palmach was the first enlisted military force prepared to encounter the enemy and defend the Jewish Yeshuv. So I went over how they were established, how they were put together, about the Haganah High Command, decided to put them together in, I think it was 1941 during World War II. And I left off, yes. So in the spring, summer of 1941, 6 mobile strike companies, Palmach, were established within the framework of the Haganah as the national and regional combat reserve units, ready for immediate action. They were mobile. They could go anywhere. They could boom. They could respond. They were positioned in the eastern Galilee and the Jezreel Valley, western Galilee and Jezreel Valley, and Haifa region, in Samaria and the Sharon, in Tel Aviv, in the south, and in Jerusalem. Yitzhak Sadeh was appointed commander of the Palmach. So he would have been tapped commander by Haganah and Ben Gurion, because it's funny when you think about it. It's so one of the interesting things. So I did a bunch of interviews, and the state's small. It's not a big place, so it's not hard to get to someone who knows someone who can put you into contact with someone, meaning someone important, someone in the government. In the old days, and I love using in the old days, that was even easier. All these guys knew each other. Like in some of the courses that I took at City College of New York that deal with pre-state Israel, all these guys knew each other. Golda Meir and Ben Gurion and Dayan and Rabin and all these guys, they all knew each other. And it's so crazy to think that all of these individuals by themselves have a stature, but to think that all of these guys were working in concert, much like those during the Revolution in the United States. So I think it's fabulous. It's really neat and it's really interesting. And the Palmach weaves its story through all of these individuals' lives. So I told you we ended on the night of the bridges. I didn't use that phrase. In the research for this episode, I found that phrase as what they called it. And it was Operation Marcolet. And it was June 16th to June 17th. And the Palmach blew up 10 of the 11 bridges connecting mandatory Palestine to its neighboring countries. Those were Lebanon, Syria, Transjordan, and Egypt. Now, during this, they suffered no casualties, with the exception of the 12 Palmach deaths that occurred during the attack on Nahal Akziv Bridge going to Lebanon, which was north of Akko. So that's an incredibly, as I said, they were effective. So this is a very successful campaign. Now, in response to this, the British got way ticked off. Hold on, I'm going to tell you about how ticked off they got after I have a sip of this coffee. Peter Madeira, this is for you. I can't do a show without drinking coffee, I swear. I can't do much without drinking coffee. That's my kryptonite. There you go. So the British got super duper PO'd by this. Trying to keep it PG. They got super duper mad and they launched Operation Agatha, which became known as Black Sabbath. And that was June 29th. The British military and police units began a 3-day operation searching 3 cities and Jewish settlements throughout Palestine and imposing curfews. Now, they arrested 2,718 Jews and seized numerous arms and munitions, which were found unexpectedly. Yeah, unexpected. These guys knew. The British knew they were That's the big feint that I don't believe, that the British, well, we just had no idea anything was going on. They raided the Jewish building, and numerous documents were confiscated. And during the operation, 4 Jews were killed and 80 were injured. Now, I tell you about the releasing of Jewish prisoners by the Palmach, that the Palmach went and they did a raid. Those were, it was, I'm pretty sure it was in response to this, Operation Agatha, Black Sabbath. Now, after I told you that because of this, Lehi and Irgun, and it's starting to become the relationship. Last episode, I got really frustrated because I wasn't getting good information on how the relationship between the Irgun and Lehi was, what it was comprised of, what the relationship actually was. Because I was reading a lot that Irgun was saying, "Oh, we don't have anything to do with the Stern Gang," which is who Lehi were. They were the Stern Gang, and these guys were real proponents of active attacks against the British. They also attacked the Arab population, but their primary focus for the Irgun and for Lehi was attacking the British. So, after the King David bombing, which happened in 1946, the Palmach stood down for 10 months. They didn't do any more operations, which I find really interesting because there was a lot going on. Like, this is a period that outside of Israel is not really taught. And I'm actually not even sure how much this period is taught inside Israel. But after that 10 months, you had something called the Civil War in Mandatory Palestine. Okay? And that was new information to me. It was absolutely 100% new information to me. Now, I knew that there was an armed struggle by the Haganah and by the Palmach and by the Irgun and Lehi. All of this was the Hebrew resistance movement that were working against the British. But I didn't realize that it had collapsed into civil war. Well, it had. And on May 20th, as their kickoff, Palmach blew up a coffee house in Fallujah in retaliation for the murder of 2 Jews in nearby Petah Tikva. Now, in my research, I couldn't find out who killed those Jews. I couldn't find out if it was the British or if it was the Arabs. But there was a significant slant in the information that I was getting. And this is another, kind of teased me off a little bit. All right, so I'm Jewish. Most of you know that. You could probably tell from the kippah on my head and from the beginning of the thing where I say I'm Jewish. Now, one of the tropes, one of the anti-Semitic tropes is that we control the media. Well, if we control the media, then how come we can't get the right story out? And how come all the stories paint us as the bad guy? Because in my research, I found that there were a number of retaliations by the Palmach, but they omitted why those retaliations occurred. So, on November 29th, 1947, the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 181, and that was the UN partition plan. And that was the roadmap for the mandate to end and for the territories to be turned over for a Jewish state and an Arab state. And the Jews rejoiced, and the Arabs said no. That's it. They just said no. Actually, they said it 4 times, but they said no. Now, what the Arabs did do is not just say no, but they also rioted. And there were the Jerusalem riots of 1947. And the British, how do I put this? They didn't stop the riots. They redirected the riots. So as the riots were coming towards the British, they said, no, you can't come this way. They didn't disperse the riots. They just said you can't come this way. They had already taken a massive hands-off approach to mandatory Palestine in 1947. The British did. So what did they do? What did the Arab rioters do? They went and they burned buildings, they killed Jews, and this, of course, wasn't going to stand at all. And in retaliation to a number of things, to a number of events like this, and a number of killings, the Palmach and the Yishuv, the general government, had come to a point where, well, they're leaving. The British aren't going to do anything to stop the Arabs. So we have to do something to protect ourselves. So, and this is where it gets really hazy. And the Irgun and Lehi decided this was balagan. We're not going to stand for this. And one of the things that ensued was Irgun in Haifa threw a bomb into a crowd. And that sparked the Haifa oil refinery riot, in which, in retaliation for that bomb thrown by the Irgun, troublemakers, absolutely, murderers, absolutely, because attacking a military installation, a genuine target, absolutely. Going in and throwing a bomb into a crowd, you're a terrorist. But Lehi said, we're terrorists. Stern Gang, they said, we're terrorists. The problem is, it seems like every time the Irgun and the Stern Gang did something, Palmach took the brunt of it. Palmach, this mobile strike force, had to clean up their mess. And I think 50? It was either 50 or 80 Jews were killed in the Haifa oil refinery massacre. I'm going to say 50. It could be more. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I apologize. But there were numerous razings of villages by the Palmach. Now, I didn't find in the research that the Palmach, it's almost as if whoever wrote the article only cared that the Palmach razed the villages. Didn't care that there was a thing called the ALA, which was the Arab Liberation Army, which was also doing retaliatory attacks. This was a civil war between the Arab population and the Jewish population, the Yishuv in pre-state Israel. They talk about all of the things that the Palmach did, but they talk about nothing, almost nothing, that the Arab fighters and militants did. And it's really problematic because it doesn't give you the whole story. It makes it look like the Palmach are death squads, and they're not. They're absolutely not. They're fighters. They're soldiers. They're people who enlisted to defend the Yishuv. And it disgusts me that there is an inconsistency in reporting the facts on this. It really bothers me. So I apologize. I needed to address that because it makes me very angry. Now, during this, Al-Husseini was this guy who had, I think it was the Army of Holy Warriors. And he was in Egypt. He was a Palestinian fighter who became a Palestinian general. And he brought his, a couple thousand, or at first it was 1,000, and then he got more troops. And he brought them out of Egypt into mandatory Palestine. And they sieged Jerusalem, cutting it off. And the Jews of Jerusalem had no stores, no food, no anything. So, the Haganah, in conjunction with the Palmach, fought to open that line up, and get them the supplies that they need. Eventually, they were very successful. But on January 16th, 1948, the Palmach lost 18 men, along with 17 Haganah fighters on their way to reinforce the garrison at Kfar Etzion. I'm sorry, that's where they were going after they were attacked by hundreds of Arab locals and militias. And the bodies of the Palmach and Haganah fighters were mutilated to the point that some of them could not be recognized. So this was, I'm sorry, this is what fired people up. This is what fired the Yeshuv up. This is what angered people. I understand bad things were done on both sides. Absolutely. There's Der Yassin, and apparently it's alluded that Palmach was involved in that. I don't know what the veracity of it is. I know that from what I read, Palmach fired mortars into Der Yassin, but who's to say what intel they got? Were they told that Der Yassin, because some of the stuff that I read, Der Yassin was a staging area for Arab fighters during, was that during the War of Independence? At least during that time between the Civil War and the War of Independence. And can you fault them if they got bad intel? No, you can't. And it's horrible, but it's military operations. It's a war. And it just, to bring the stain of that onto the Palmach, it feels like some of the research that's been done into this is real half-assed. So I apologize. And I'm going on to this rant about that stuff. And that's not information it's information that about the Palmach that isn't necessarily about the Palmach. It's information that it's information that's intended to taint the story. Okay. And it just frustrates me. It frustrates me a lot. So all of that happened. They were successful in freeing that. So then, in advance of the British leaving, so all of this is happening. All of this is going on. This civil war is going on as the British are packing up to leave Mandatory Palestine and turn it over to whoever's going to have it. So let me take a sip of coffee. Hold on one sec. So all of this is happening at a time that is so up in the air, it's not even funny. The Yishuv is preparing to lay the groundwork for its new state in the territories that were allocated on Resolution 181. The Arabs are fighting them in response to Resolution 181. And they're fighting them in a place that they're going to live. So they needed to make the area safe. They needed to make it so that the Jewish state could exist and exist safely. So one of the things that they did was they started to implement something that was called Plan Dalet, Plan D. And it was part of a multi-stage plan that had developed and changed over time. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. That's the Hebrew Aleph, Bet. I'm hiccuping, sorry. So there's a lot of controversy over Plan Dalet as to whether or not it was meant to ethnically cleanse the North and the Galilee. From the stuff that I've read, that wasn't the case. It was specifically used to go in, clear out towns that were harboring enemies or acting as staging points for enemy forces, and to just clear them out and to make it safe. You're living in a war zone, okay? You're supporting an enemy that's attacking who is going to be the rightful occupant of an area. You can't complain when they tell you to leave, you know what I mean? I know that sounds heartless, I know that sounds mean, but you don't get to be you don't, the loser doesn't dictate the terms. That's all there is to it. And I'm sorry if that sounds heartless. It isn't my view on the larger dynamic of the Arab-Israeli war, but it is my view on the instance of Arab towns being razed, Arab towns being removed of occupants. And I'm sorry, so you have individuals who sit here and say, I've lived here for 500 years. Okay, I understand that. But you're fighting me, and this is our country. I understand that, but I've lived here for 500 years. Your willingness to endanger my safety is not trumped by the fact that you've lived here a long time. I'm sorry, you've got to go. If it's traitorous behavior. You know what I mean? That's the way I feel. It's going to be controversial. I'm sorry. That's how I feel. Anyways. So, during this, there was a thing called Operation Yiftach, and that's where they went in and over a month-long battle to capture and liberate Tzfat and the northern Galilee, the eastern Galilee. They fought hard. They lost tons of people. It was a raging battle, street by street. And the Palmach fought hard, and they earned every inch of ground that they took. And that's why they're remembered with this hallowed reverence, because they did things like Operation Yiftach. Now, with the activation of Plan D and its sub-operations, Palmach units were used to demolish villages with the objective of preventing them being used by Palestinian irregulars or the ALA as bases. So you had the Arab Liberation Army. So you had these Arab towns which were willfully harboring and supporting the enemies of the Haganah, the enemies of the Palmach, the enemies of the Yeshuv, in their allocated land as directed by UN Resolution 181. So they're within their rights. They're totally within their rights, and they fought for that ground, and they get to keep it. Bottom line. Now, all of this happens. The establishment of the state happens. The IDF is established, the Israel Defense Forces. Now, there was one final act that the Palmach was involved in, and that was June 22nd, 1948. And that was the Altalena affair. And that was Palmach's, as an independent unit, their last operation. Again, it was against the Irgun, who had moored the ship, the Altalena, off the coast of Tel Aviv, and it was loaded with weapons. Now, Ben Gurion did not want the Irgun to have these weapons. He wanted them disbanded. He wanted them absorbed into the Haganah, those that could be absorbed, and the rest of them, boom, you guys are bad seeds. We don't want you in it. And there was so Ben Gurion ordered the Palmach, which was the unit was commanded by Yigal Alon and his deputy Yitzhak Rabin, and he wanted them to prevent the arms from coming ashore. In the ensuing battle, 14 members of the Irgun were killed, and one Palmach casualty, one death on the Palmach side. And this was the final thing that they were involved with. Now, with the establishment of the Israeli army, the Palmach was reorganized into 3 separate IDF brigades. There were the Negev Brigade, which is in the south under the Southern Command, the Yiftach Brigade, and the Harel Brigade. The Negev and Yiftach brigades fought in the Negev against the Egyptian army and managed to stop and later repulse them into the Gaza Strip and Sinai. And the Yiftach Brigade was later transferred to the north. Now, the Harel Brigade was centered on Jerusalem, and the merging of the Palmach into the Israeli army involved a series of, issues and power struggles with Ben Gurion, and this eventually wound up becoming so contentious and became known as the Generals' Revolt. And this caused several generals to resign in 1948, which politics, literally, just politics. We want the country this way. You want the country this way. No, no, no. So that's basically what happened. In total, the Palmach lost 1,187 fighters, heroes, patriots, during the War of Independence and in the years prior to Israel's creation. And that, my friends, is the story of the Palmach. And remember how I was saying in the beginning how all of these people were together, and it just weaves with all the great heroes of pre-state and early state Israel. As you noticed from me telling the story, it weaves in with different organizations too. I told you about the Yeshuv. We've learned about the Yeshuv. We've learned about the Irgun, which is going to be another episode. The Palmach. We learned about them and how great and dynamic they are. And they're just awesome. And that is why in Tel Aviv there is a museum, the Palmach Museum, and it talks about all of these interesting stories and the individual stories and about how common Jews came out and defended what would eventually become their home, the Jewish state. Wow, cool. I love this story. And I love you guys, and that's it. All right, so that's it for this episode. Thank you for watching, and if you like this episode, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and the notification bell. If you want to catch us and take us with you, you can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and on Spotify. Also, check out all of our social media. We're on Facebook, YouTube, which you're probably watching this on YouTube. If you're not, then you can catch us on YouTube. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Also, in the beginning, I told you about all of the stuff we're doing with the 12 Cities in Israel Modern Hebrew flashcards. Check them out. A lot of work, a lot of time went into doing them. They are a labor of love. And you can get them on Amazon. If you want to get the print copy, though, the box sets, donate or invest in our Kickstarter. And as I said, the Kickstarter and the Amazon links are both down in the description. All right, that's it. Thanks a lot. Toda rabah, להתראות ויאללה ביי.
לחישה בלילה והיא איננה גם שרחוקה היא ממני
זיכרונה עולה שוב בליבי הלילה איך אותה רציתי כל חיי
ידי בידה ולאור ירח עוד יאיר לי כוחה בידה אחזתי, היא כמו חלום שלא נגמר
רק זאת שאלתי, שליבי נתתי הושעתי לפרח הנשאר
רק זאת שאלתי, שליבי נתתי הושעתי לפרח הנשאר